everyone. Welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California City, currently shrouded in smog. And buddy, let me tell you, my catastrophizing brain is having a field day with it. But before we go too far down the rabbit hole of my brain, why don't I just introduce today's guest? Why, it's the wonderful René Kladzyk, a.k.a. Ziemba. If you don't know who René is, why don't I read you her bio right now? Originally from Michigan, René Kladzyk is an El Paso-based musician and writer. As a journalist, she works for El Paso Matters and frequently reports on the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. She is also an advocate for music industry reform and creator of the Future Music Industry, a compendium of music industry orgs run by women and non-binary people. And of course, as Ziemba, she's written a number of albums and EPs, including last year's True Romantic and her latest album, Unsubtle Magic, out next week on Sister Polygon Records. I praise it profusely in the episode, so I don't want to be too obsequious here. I would just say it's great. In fact, why don't I play an excerpt from one of the songs before we get into the interview? In case you've never heard René's music before, give you a little taste. But yeah, this is great. René's both a journalist and a musician. We talk about both those things and the connections between them, about growing up in Michigan and El Paso and the border, and lots of other really interesting stuff. This was fascinating, lovely, a lot of other adjectives. You can Mad Libs it yourself. By the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you so much for checking out the show. What I like to do here in the intro is a little recommended if you like my interview with René. Maybe you're a fan of indie rock and you want to hear interviews with other, maybe women in indie rock. Why, I've talked to Mary Timony, I've talked to Ellen Kepner of Palehound, Sadie Dupuis, aka Sad 13. Just a few months ago, Night Jewel. That was really wonderful. And of course, if you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. Got a lot of amazing episodes coming up. I just recorded one with John Linnell from They Might Be Giants. That was really wonderful. John Vanderslice. That was also great. Rebecca Gibney. That was just yesterday, in fact. The Australian star of the show Wanted. If you haven't seen that on Netflix, it's a delightful show that I highly recommend. She had a real journey in her childhood to get to acting, and we delve all into that on an upcoming episode, so stay tuned for that. But coming up next on Beginnings, René Kladzyk, a.k.a. Ziemba, and first, an excerpt from a song from Unsubtle Magic. This is the first part of Will You Haunt Me? And yes, I used to be a college radio DJ. Here we go. long to-do list because I have been in this marathon writing session the last couple of weeks, finishing up this feature film I'm writing. And your new album was basically the soundtrack to that marathon writing session.
Oh, wow. Well, I'd love to hear all about this film.
I don't know if I can say anything.
If you're at liberty, yeah. Okay.
But just so that's not ambiguous, I want to say how much I love the album. And as a Jew, if you can get me to enjoy an album that has Christmas themes in it, I think you have done something interesting. If that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah. I've long been the campaigner for the holiday music haters that no, there is good holiday music out there. Because I don't know, it's like even, I mean, I'm not like a practicing Christian or anything, but it's so ubiquitous that time of year, you can't avoid like all these signifiers and symbols of it. But
yes, as a Jew who grew up in Pennsylvania, in a very Christian part of Pennsylvania, I am fully aware it is impossible to, no matter what little crevice or corner of culture you can dig yourself into, get away from.
Which is why it's so easy to hate it, because the world just like becomes a never-ending Christmas prison wherever you go for like, a couple weeks, or depending on where you live. I think it started already in some places. I saw the day after Halloween, Mariah Carey posted a video that was like, it's time.
Sure. Well, that's her bread and butter. But like, I mean, the thing is though, it's a little bit, it's not that I hate it, it's that I just find it alienating in a way. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm not even particularly that observant, but I definitely find it's like, swimming in a pool that's the wrong temperature for your body, if that makes sense. And I'm kind of curious about your own, like, is Christmas just like a cultural thing for you? Do you have a particular religious connection to Christmas or Christianity in general?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty complicated answer to that question, because I was raised with kind of two different religious upbringings, because my parents divorced when I was really little, and my dad's side of the family is intensely Catholic, super duper Catholic. And my mom is a weirdo artist hippie who was like, you can believe whatever you want from like a very young age, and if anything, the influences that she like instilled in me were more kind of in a maybe new age zone.
Interesting.
So I think from a pretty early age, I approached spirituality without feeling bound to like a particular spirituality. And like I always appreciated the music of Catholicism and the art of it, even though for as long as I can remember, I always had a lot of beef with it. And on, beef with like the shame and guilt that I felt put on me as a young woman from a very early age because of Catholicism and Christianity and the way that it is to be a woman. Sure. I mean, Catholicism is not the only religion that has women problems, but I definitely felt it. But anyways, with Christmas, I think the music of Christmas when I was a little kid had very little to do with religion. Well, I mean, obviously there's like religious Christmas music, and I experienced that, but like my sister and I were obsessed with Christmas carols, and we sang them all the time. Like we must have been horrible to be around.
When you say all the time, do you mean just around Christmas, or you mean all the time?
No,
like all year long?
Like year round. He sees you when you're like in the back seat of the car, and I mean a lot of my early musical memories are it's like Disney, Celine Dion, and Christmas carols are like my earliest musical influences, and then like being in church and school choir stuff once I was like past 5. But I mean, my before school musical memories, that's pretty much what those influences were. But it's funny because, like, that all being said, I don't really feel like, I mean, this album talks a lot about the holidays and Christmas, but it's also, there's only one actual, like, Christmas carol on it. It's mostly not that. It's just kind of, like, talking about that time of year. And I also think there's something that I really love and maybe long for now that I live in El Paso about the magic of winter. And I feel like there's a lot of that in this album too. Like what happens when the world gets blanketed in snow and how your perception of the world changes. Yeah. And there's something kind of mystical in that. Like, I mean, it's just like a contemplative time, I think, when it gets really cold and, you know, the world gets covered in snow. I think it kind of lends itself to introspection, that like winter solstice time of year.
Well, I mean, you moved to El Paso at, like, what, age 9, something around that, if I remember reading correctly?
It's a little complicated. My dad married my stepmom, who's from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, when I was around 9, and they moved to El Paso. But I was still living with my mom, so I would come to El Paso for Christmas and for summer vacation and stuff. And I didn't live in El Paso full-time until I was in high school. Okay. So I as a kid, I moved around between Michigan, like very rural, small town Michigan, and then Flagstaff, Arizona, and El Paso, Texas.
Interesting.
So I always, like, whenever anyone asks where I'm from, it's always like a very long-winded answer. Like,
yeah, well, no, but I look for those kind of, like, I keep calling them ruptures, but I don't have a better word at the moment. But those kind of things that, like I grew up all in one place in Pennsylvania. And
where in Pennsylvania?
Reading, Pennsylvania.
Where is that?
It is about an hour west of Philadelphia.
Okay. All right.
It's like a city. It's 80,000 people. It's not small, but it's also like. But I grew up in the suburbs, and I think something had to happen to me later on in life, to be able to, like, gain self-awareness to look inside. And I think, like, especially geographic ruptures give you a little bit of distance. I don't know if that's true for you. It's, you know, it's not a hard and fast rule on this show, but I do think that these kind of, like, moving from a drastic move from one place to another happens to give you a little bit of space. And I'm curious if that was your experience, especially what I would say, like, and I actually kind of want to talk about this a bit, but, like, El Paso on the border, your stepmother being from Juarez, which is, you know, a very, I forget Charles Bowden exactly. Have you ever read any of his stuff?
Yeah. What did he call it? He called it, like, a laboratory for the future.
Yes.
Murder City, I think was the name of one of his books about Juarez.
Yeah. Yes. Laboratory for the future was the phrase I was kind of grappling for there. But yeah, but basically, like, this kind of, like, well, here's what capitalism is going to probably lead us into if we don't do something. And I think it's a very, like, especially you saying rural Michigan, I feel like that's a very drastic change. But I don't know. Tell me, that's a lot. But, like, you know, tell me what that brings up in your brain.
Well, yeah. I mean, the moving around as a child was very fundamental to the person that I became, the career paths I've chosen, the way I approach the world, like, kind of at a very basic level. So the town that I lived in from, like, 0 to 8 is called Forestville, and it's on Lake Huron in the thumb of Michigan, and it's a population of, like, 115 maybe. Like, and it's a very economically depressed area now. There used to be a gas station and a post office in the town, but they have both since closed. Like, that's the scale. And I think in that time, I really only ever interacted with white people, was extremely sheltered from the way the actual world is. It's like, if you go to the thumb of Michigan, it's kind of this bizarre reality because it just feels very disconnected from the world. And I really didn't get exposed to, like, my dad didn't, like, really put on the news in the house much. So I just, that early childhood period, I just really did not know of or conceive of the greater world beyond. And I remember when I moved to live with my mom when I was 8 and moved to this also small town, but like it felt much, much larger outside of Dexter, Michigan. And I was like, oh, I'm a hick. like I had like a thick accent, and like all the kids seemed so cultured and cool, and they like went to the mall, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I got all my clothes at Norman's, or I don't even know if you know what that is. But anyway, so that was like the first time that I was like, oh, there's a lot more than what I have experienced. And then when my dad married my stepmom and I gained this whole Mexican branch of my family, it was like shocking in the best way, even though, I mean, it was challenging because like I immediately realized how racist Michigan was and particularly anti-Mexican racism once I knew and loved people in Mexico, because I had never had any exposure to Mexican culture before my dad married my stepmom. But so that was like a huge shift to my worldview and my understanding of who I was. And then, I mean, later on, like going to high school in El Paso, where I was like one of 2 white girls in my grade, that was also really like an impactful time of kind of thinking about white privilege and like perceptions of me when I was in a context that, I mean, because living in Michigan, it was extremely white. Yeah. Like, and that I was in high school in El Paso at a really interesting point too, because 9/11 happened my junior year in high school, and the border was closed, and there were a lot of girls at my school who crossed from Juarez every day to go to school, so they couldn't come to school. And so I became very aware of like kind of the impacts of geopolitical decision-making on people's like day-to-day lives. Yeah. Which is really like what I work on now as a reporter. I mean, so for listeners who are unaware, or I don't know if you'll maybe say this, but I work as a reporter at a local news outlet in El Paso, and I mostly report on immigration stuff. So anyways, yeah, I mean, all of that was like hugely foundational for what I ended up doing. I did my master's research all about El Paso and Juarez, and that's largely because like in my lifetime, I've seen Juarez transform so insanely. Like I had never watched a city change that much, and I just got really fascinated with this area.
Can you speak more about that? Like what was the shift that you saw?
So between like 2008 and 2010, the violence in Juarez really skyrocketed, and it became like the most dangerous city in the world. And it became a very lawless place where there was no real expectation of, like if a crime was committed against you, you couldn't like call the police because no one trusted the police. There was just like total impunity. And because of that, there was like a mass exodus. I mean, thousands of businesses closed, and the level of threat was just so pervasive. Like everybody was threatened. Even, I mean, I don't know. It was just really overwhelming to see like the strip that when I was in high school, we would walk across the bridge and go party in the bars in Juarez. And then during that time, 2008 to 2010, that same strip with like all the businesses boarded up, and the Mexican government sent troops in. It was like a war zone because the violence was so bad, because there were like all these like assassinations happening in the street, and you would drive through and like they had like safety corridors, but those were like a lot of the time the most dangerous routes, even though that was where the like government was guarding the road. But because so many people were tied in with the cartels, it just, I mean, I grew up going to Juarez regularly, like not all the time, but I would, we would always go for Christmas or go to the fair or whatever to see like my grandma there and stuff. So yeah, it was really shocking when it became that, and really deeply tragic. And like, I know for my stepmom, who is from there originally and grew up there, I mean, it's just so painful to see what it's become. So that's when I did my graduate research there, was when the violence got really bad. And like all these people were trying to leave, but it was kind of like, the haves and the have-nots. Like the people who could leave did, and the people who couldn't leave were fucked.
Right. Right. No, I mean, I'm curious about this for a number of reasons. One, I am on, I do a lot of work I'm in DSA, and I do a lot of work with the Immigration Justice Committee. And so I'm, that's like top of my mind there. But I'm also kind of curious about how you think your creative life and your life as a journalist, not that they're separate, but like, what are the connections, if that makes any sense, right? I know I said they're not separate, but like, like when you write a song, it's a different mode of being than when you are writing a story. And I'm kind of curious if you've thought about, or if there are kind of connections between those two ways of making things.
I think that the like underlying way that I approach making creative work and that I approach telling stories through like journalism is kind of, there's a common thread in me, like being a borderlander, or like we call like fronterizo is the word here. But like that, I think if you're a person who's like from the border, then you like are comfortable with in-betweens. Like I'm not really super into categories, and I never felt very beholden to them as a musician. And I think a lot of people do. And that really like limits the way that they conceive of what is an option for you. I've always been like a multi-hyphenate sort of person, just because I'm like curious about a lot of different stuff. And I don't know, probably an astrologer would be like, you're a Gemini, Cancer cusp, Not
on this show.
But no, I think I've naturally gravitated toward those like murky in between zones and been resistant to easy categorization. And so that's characterized the way I approach writing songs, or making all the stuff that goes along with a song, like building the world for it, a music video, and the way that I've approached journalism. Because I mean, I think it's a strength of mine that I tend to be like pretty creative in how I write stories. Like I don't always do the same thing, and I don't always do it from like the institutionally ordained method. And I don't feel like I have to, which I think that a lot of people, especially those who maybe have a very linear career path, they believe deep down that like there is a right and wrong way to do things, and I just don't buy that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but I was in grad school, and I'd say this a lot, so I'll be very brief. But like I left before my dissertation just because there was a very institutional voice. What's the easy way to say this? Basically, I was going to grad school during the Bush years, and it was philosophy, and they were teaching that like there's a universal truth. And there's something when you study truth, there's something that's when you find what's true, capital T true, you're finding a universal, right? And it just so happens it's weird that like whatever is the truth is just whatever the status quo says is right. Whether we're talking moral truths or we're talking about the way the world is or something like that. And I started to kind of rebel against that. And no one in the administration or no one in the department was happy with what I was writing. So
they just couldn't hack you being a postmodernist.
Well, it was not even that. Like, it wasn't even this kind of like, because it wasn't like truth, like, it's not relativistic. I had an approach that had to do with like Kuhn and paradigms, and there is truth. It's just that it's paradigmatic and that you have to understand power and all this other kind of stuff. That is all this preface to say that like, was it just being this kind of in-between person that gave you the ability to either make things or write stories from a point of view that was not institutional? Or are there other kinds of factors? Like what gives you that kind of ability to, because I didn't get into like, I started really reading Chomsky, in college and stuff like that.
Well, so you'll probably get a kick out of this, but I too dropped out of a PhD program in Pennsylvania. No, nonetheless, I briefly went to Penn State, and I think that part of why I started that PhD program is that I felt like I needed institutional validation in order for my work to matter. And while I was there, it was just so abundantly clear to me that that wasn't the way to share my gifts or the way to reach people. And I got way more like interested in accessibility. Like that, I mean, that's my big beef with academia, is just that, you know, you can't, there's so much information that's being produced in a way that most people will never be able to understand, because it's just like caked in jargon behind paywalls and academic journal articles.
Yeah. And there's no attempt to even like say like, hey, maybe I should write this. This is important what I'm writing. Maybe I should write an article in the New York Times. I mean, not the New York Times, fuck them, but like maybe I should write an article in some kind of like public place in a way that normal people can read this thing.
Yeah.
Right. There's not even there's no attempt at all.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes me so mad. Like, especially for the amount of taxpayer money that goes to producing these research studies that then people cannot read. Yeah, free the research. But anyway, so I dropped out of my PhD program and I started writing for Teen Vogue. And I made a music video for my song El Paso that was like it was kind of like a miniature version of my master's thesis, but with like baked into a music video. It was like a border history lesson. And I was just like, this is the way I want to be making stuff, is like, I want to be reaching people who need this information, or who it can help them to be galvanized to affect positive change in the world in some way. I mean, like, big picture, that's the goal. It's like, we're only alive for so long. Let's try to do something to help in some way.
René, you're speaking directly. It's like you got one of those tin cans on a string straight into my heart.
I'm glad you feel the same, because I don't know. Yeah, nihilism is a huge bummer, and so common to like feel like you can't affect change, and I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah. I think what it's about is like being able to analyze correctly the structures and then figure out where they're weakest. I know that was a little theoretical, but like what I'm trying, like, okay, here's a concrete example. One of the things we were doing for a while with DSA for the Immigration Justice Committee was figuring out how to like fight back against the private prisons that were separating families. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's a private prison at Adelanto that's like outside, it's like 90 minutes outside of Los Angeles, owned by this company called Geo Group. And they're a $1 billion company. It's just like, there's nothing you can do about them as a whole. But if you analyze the structures of like their company, and you analyze like the boards that these people are on, that are on the board of Geo Group, and you analyze like all the law firms and all the PR firms that they employ and all that stuff, you find out that they have connections to like more liberal kinds of things. And then one of the things we found was like, we didn't do anything with this because like it just got too overwhelming, but like one of their PR firms or one of their law firms is also the like law firm or PR firm for NPR.
Oh, wow.
And then you try to push like NPR listeners and be like, hey, you know, the money you give to NPR goes to this law firm that then goes to, you know, caged children or whatever. Right. So that's why, yes, nihilism to me seems like a lazy way out of it. Because you can always like do some kind of analysis. It takes work, and you have to like do some digging. I mean, I don't have to tell you. You're a journalist. You're an actual journalist. I don't have to tell you that, but like for the listener. Yeah. Was it just this going through grad school and finding it distasteful in a similar way that I did? You know, what led you to kind of have this point of view? Or were there predecessors, or like maybe a more pointed question is, were there predecessors to this point of view in your childhood that then gave you the foundation to forge this path?
I think that something that's a little more amorphous, but it had a big role in how I approach my, like, I don't know, I guess professional life or like public life, for whatever that means, is community and being around people who have an idea and then do it. Like, I think it's really motivating to see someone who you know and you care about have an idea and then carry it out to fruition. And I've been very lucky to have a lot of really talented, open-hearted people in my life who have done just radical stuff that really encouraged me and showed me, hey, like, if you have an idea and you feel passionately about it, you can do it. I think a lot of people put false limits on themselves, and maybe this goes back to that kind of linear life path we were talking about. Like, I think there's kind of a line that people get fed in like school that tells you that you need to do X, Y, and Z to then land at like good life, and then you're like done. You're done learning and growing and doing stuff. You just do this job for the rest of your life, and like you're supposed to be happy. And I think a lot of people end up very complacent and unhappy because they feel unfulfilled and they feel like a lot of things are not possible for them. Or I don't know, that's an observation I've made, that having a creative community when I lived in New York, that really pushed me and encouraged me to take big risks, and being in a position of privilege to be able to do that. You know, I don't have kids, I don't have debt. So there is for sure that part of like the risks I've been able to take. Sure. But yeah, I think having this attitude that I can like have an idea and then do it and make it happen has made a lot of things happen. Like I booked a Europe tour on my own. I didn't have a booking agent. And when I went to Europe, I had like no money. It was ridiculous. I mean, I had guarantees lined up at some of the shows, but I remember when I flew out there, I had like $400 in my bank account. I was like, this could be like really bad if something goes wrong. But it worked and it was great. It was an amazing experience. And then like that fed like the next tour, you know, it's like you have to kind of dive and risk total failure and be willing to fail to like do cool shit that fills your life with joy.
Yes. Okay. So let me go back a little bit, though, and I want to kind of wind our way back to this. You know, you said you grew up in Forestville, right? Is that...
Forestville's the first place, yeah.
Forestville's the first place. 115 people. You know, what is the... Besides being, like, you, in your words, hick, like, or sheltered, you know, what is it like? That's not a lot of people. That's, like, a place where you know everyone. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you grow up with that kind of like, oh, a feeling like I'm in everyone's business?
No, I think it was more that there wasn't very much to do, and so my sister and I had to like build elaborate fantasy worlds for ourselves to have fun. Like okay. this one summer, my sister and I are very, very close and very similar. And she was always like my co-conspirator in all of the creative stuff as kids. But there was this one summer in Forestville that she and I decided to write and produce a musical. Mm-hmm. And we like cast all the kids in the town in it. And then they all quit. Like it totally failed because we had cast ourselves as the stars. Like, sure. I'm sorry, I was maybe a pretty obnoxious child. But I don't know. I mean, I think like not having a lot of external stimulation early on forced me maybe to be very creative and to... I mean, we did a lot of stuff. I think also being limited in the amount of TV I was allowed to watch, we like made our own newspaper and we did a lot of theatrical productions like that we wrote. So there was a lot of like creativity in my childhood that was trying to stay busy and have fun.
Yeah. Is it also when did your parents get divorced? Like, how old were you?
Like 2.
Okay. So
I don't remember when they were together. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm kind of curious if there is some kind, well, I mean, I guess not. I guess you don't have to worry. The question was going to be like, do you have to like go inwards to like deal with like the emotional stuff? But it doesn't seem like they were like, you were too young. If they were arguing in front of you, you were too young to kind of like internalize any of that stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have no memory of them together or the process of them splitting up. I mean, I remember being a little kid and hoping they would get back together. But my mom also married my now ex-stepdad when I was 3. So It was like not really ever on the table that they were going to get back together.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I think I felt some like sadness or longing for like a normal family when I was little, but it wasn't a major thing. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, it was more just tricky logistically because going back and forth.
Right. I mean, how does a hippie marry a devout Catholic in the first place?
Well, so my dad's side of the family is intensely Catholic. My dad was Catholic, but he too was a hippie. He was a singer-songwriter in the 70s, and he made a living as a touring musician for like 12 years before my mom got pregnant. And so they were brought together with him as this like weirdo singer-songwriter dude and her as this like young art student. She was a lot younger than him. So she was in her early 20s when they met and he was in his 30s. But then when my mom got pregnant, my dad quit music and got a 9-to-5 and was like, okay, we're going to do the nuclear family thing. And she was like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like, I mean, she was like being stuck in Forestville, Michigan when like they had one car and he took it to work. She told me recently, I didn't know this, that she would have to snowshoe to her job at this pizza place 4 miles away, like every day. So I mean, yeah, she was super isolated and lonely and unfulfilled being a stay-at-home mom. And it just wasn't the right thing for her. And my dad ended up marrying my stepmom, who's a much more traditional woman and had always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And they were like a better fit. But yeah, like, I mean, it makes sense that it didn't work out between my mom and my dad because I think they were very different people when they got together than what they became after they had kids.
I mean, when they get divorced, does your mom recapture some of that, not hippiness, but freedom? I'm not sure what word I want. Maybe you're getting the flavor, though.
Yeah, I mean, well, she had a pretty wide-ranging career of doing mostly like graphic design and marketing stuff, but like her second husband, they had a lot more in common in terms of the prioritization of like art and creativity. She was also really politically active. So like as a little kid, like she would always take me to protests and she was involved in a lot of like art projects for other artists too. So she was like big into creative community and political organizing, and taught me the value of that from a really young age. I mean, like, I feel like I was very aware of like feminism from a very early age and like also, had like she had a lot of gay friends and there was this lesbian couple who she was really tight with, and one of them kind of became my like lesbian mentor. I think starting from when I was like 11, maybe, she would like send me books and like got me this magazine subscription and CDs and stuff. Like my mom exposed me to a lot of more kind of progressive ideology and was very interested in being that sort of mom. She was also like really into health food and like cooking and my dad was a lot more traditional in that way. And I think that, you know, his family structure growing up was very all-American nuclear family sort of thing. My mom, that was not the case at all. Like, her dad left when she was little, and her mom raised her and her 3 sisters. So they had very different kind of models of what parenting looked like.
Yeah, but like, okay, look, for saying like at first that like you grew up in this kind of like sheltered area, you're still getting a very like open, progressive kind of understanding of the world still from your mom. Well, in a way that like I probably like most, or if not all of the other people in Forestville or a lot of people in around the country don't get. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it's a little complicated because my dad had full custody of us until I was 8. So we would go see my mom on the weekends sometimes, but my dad was the primary parent up until I was 8. And then my sister and I moved to live with our mom, and we would go see our dad every other weekend after that. So yeah, up until I was 8, I did feel like I had this very sheltered kind of experience. And then when I moved to live with my mom, it wasn't just going to Dexter where I was a hick, but it was also the different parenting style of living full-time with my mom and all of the kind of influences that she cultivated around us. And she was a lot stricter than my dad too. Like, I mean, my dad would limit like TV and stuff, but my mom was way more hardcore about it. And the result of that was that I read so much. Like, I was a crazy reader. And I think that had a big influence on everything I do now, too. Just how much I read, because that was all there was to do. I mean, I guess I could have been outside playing sports. I never participated in organized sport in my life. I was just reading, like, Stephen King books at, like, 11.
Yeah. No. I mean, I like playing stuff with my friends, but also I'm small. I like talking about this sometimes on the show, but, like, sometimes I don't believe in like actual determinism, but sometimes there's a little bit of biological determinism in that, like, I'm short, I'm not going to play basketball. I'm not Muggsy Bogues. There's like a handful of short people that can play basketball, but like, just like the size of me and my density, I'm not dense. So I'm not good at football either, really. Right. There's just some stuff about my DNA that precludes me from that. And therefore I became a reader.
Yeah. I mean, and I just am extremely klutzy, and most of my early sports experiences involved me falling in really dramatic ways and then everyone laughing. So from an early age, I was like, stay away from sports. It's embarrassing. I mean, I love to dance, and I have some athletic practices, but I would never describe myself as an athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, look, that's the thing where I'm like, there are sometimes, I wouldn't call them like over-determined bits, but there are some things that like about people's lives, and especially like looking inward at my own, where it's just like they push you in certain directions. And it's just like, it's not like it's going to say like, this is, as an adult, you're going to do X, Y, or Z, but it opens it up to like an area of stuff, and you're going to do something within that area.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think once you like journey down the path of being a voracious reader as a kid, you're already kind of a freak, like in the current culture. So then it's like you have a choice of whether to embrace that or not. And I mostly did. I mean, there were times that I tried to conform growing up, or tried to like fit in with people that I had nothing in common with. But I mean, by the end of high school, I like got really into speech and debate. I was just like, okay, I'm just going to be a nerd.
Interesting. What was the like final or the last gasp of you trying to conform, you know, and afterwards where you just gave up and you're like, I'm just going to be who I am?
I don't know if it was like a clean break like that. I think growing up, I vacillated a lot between trying to embrace being a weirdo and being into all the weird shit that I was into, and trying to fit in and not feel like a reject. Like I got bullied a lot. And so there were times when I was like, yeah, I love me. You guys are all stupid. And then there were times where I was like, why does everyone hate me? And it's like, well, like maybe I was like being really alienating and standoffish because I felt judged or something. I mean, I don't know. I think I went back and forth a lot with with feeling like I belonged or didn't belong. And moving around so much also made it hard. Because like so let's see. As a kid, I moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. Six switches from schools in different parts of the country. And it's just a hard adjustment to make. I never had that experience that other people have where they have the same circle of friends their whole lives. So I kind of always had this opportunity to reinvent myself when I went to a new place. But then after a certain amount of time, it was like, oh, okay, I'm just me. Like, whatever allure I was trying, or facade I was trying to cultivate at this new school, the illusion has been dashed.
Yeah, I could never do that because I always felt like I was creating some kind. I have a lot of trouble creating a persona for myself. Mm-hmm. Because it feels like I'm lying, and I don't like lying because I'm always worried someone's going to find the truth out, and I don't. That moment of the truth being revealed is so painful that I'm just like, let's just not go anywhere near it. I'm not even going to I don't even want to do obviously I'll do a white lie to spare someone's feelings, but beyond that, I'm not Larry David, but I'm not far away from who Larry David is in some ways. And I just don't want to deal with the repercussions of a lie being exposed. So it's the same thing with the persona. I didn't want to create a persona for myself that wasn't me, which was then led to painful things I'm just this weird kid. And I do, but I think the difference, what I think is interesting, just using myself as this kind of base to reflect off of, is that I did have the same circle of friends, and I didn't have these these ruptures that you have, where you moved around 6 times. And then I think this is kind of what I want to talk about next, is that move to El Paso, because I think you tell me, but that seems like the most dramatic move.
It was. There's some heavy stuff that precipitated that move. My mom and my ex-stepdad's divorce was a mess. It was really, really bad. And they started to split up when we all lived in Flagstaff, Arizona. And my mom left him and moved us back to Michigan. And then they reconciled and he came to Michigan. And during that period after they reconciled, it was just a bad home environment. So when I moved to El Paso, it was it was the first time it was just me moving. It wasn't the whole family or me and my sister when we moved from our dad's to our mom's. It was just me saying, I need to leave. And so I moved and went to live with my dad in El Paso. And that was really difficult. And so my sister had just graduated from high school, but I have a younger brother who was 6 years younger than me. And I felt a lot of guilt about him not being able to leave because they were both his parents, because it was bad. But I did, and it was really transformative for me, and life shaping. But I think also at that point I had moved around so much that the rupture part of it, the moving to a new town, that didn't feel as big of a deal. It was more I was excited to have kind of a stable home environment and to be able to do extracurriculars. Like I mentioned, speech and debate. Right. That was when I started. I was in all the, I just became a crazy overachiever, because before, the year when my mom and my stepdad or ex-stepdad were trying to reconcile unsuccessfully, I think I got all D's in school, and I didn't really participate in much. And it affected me a lot. So I was excited to not feel weighed down by my home environment in that way. Yeah. And to be able to just try to excel as a student and challenge myself and do a bunch of new things. So it felt really positive. It was a really positive time for me, the end of high school in El Paso.
Can you think about, you said, I forget exactly the phrase you used, but I'm going to say it refocused you or pushed you. Besides just figuring out being one of the only 2 white women in the school or in your class, and like getting a kind of broader vision of the world. How do you think that like pushed you in a different direction, like in terms of like who you were before that and then who you were after that?
I think it's like, yes, the move to El Paso in high school had something to do with it, but bigger picture, I think getting a Mexican branch of my family and becoming a bicultural family, that really shaped my worldview and the way that I approached learning about other cultures and my interest in human rights issues. Because like in high school, I like founded the Amnesty International chapter at my high school in El Paso, and I started volunteering at like a safe house for migrants. And I think moving to the border was also this kind of opening up of like the dramatic inequities in the world and the things that a lot of people don't ever see, because I mean El Paso Juarez is like this really crazy kind of global south meets global north sort of dynamic within the city. And like even as you drive on the highway, like the highway that I drove on every day to high school, you look over and you see like Anapra, which is like a shanty town outside of Juarez where a lot of people don't have running water, and like the infrastructure is so bad. So like being exposed to all of that, I think really shaped my like core ethics and understanding of how to like engage with people who are different than me, and like interrogate my own privilege on this earth. So all of that was like very much a product of having like a bicultural upbringing and a mixed nationality family.
Yeah. Is there something that you gained either in your, again, not that these are that separate, but your musical life or your life as a journalist from your family, from the Mexican side of your family? Like some cultural, like I'm just kind of curious about like, okay, because I guess I'll just like peel back the layers of this question a little bit. I'm thinking about like you're kind of formed as a person by the time you get to El Paso, not fully, right? But you're, a teenager, and the clay is there and it's being molded. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly you get this different cultural perspective. You get this whole other branch of your family that has a very different perspective, especially on like what it is to be American, right? The minute you step outside of the border, I assume that it changes your perception of this greatly. If you already didn't have that from being othered inside the border, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of curious about, what in Mexican culture, if anything, has kind of like impacted your creative life.
I mean, I think that it's tremendously impacted my creative life, but it'd be hard for me to distill down the like specific ways. Like even when my dad and my stepmom got together, I feel like pretty early on, they gave me a Selena tape. Mm-hmm. And that was like my first exposure to Spanish language, was like singing along to Selena. And the whole process, I mean, it's funny too, because there's like this question of belonging where like I simultaneously, like I claim kind of fronterizo borderlander identity, but I'm also not Mexican. Like I grew up with a whole Mexican branch of my family and Spanish being spoken in the home. My two little brothers that are my stepmoms and my dad's are both, they have Mexican citizenship and they're bilingual. I mean, I'm pretty good at Spanish, but I'm not fluent. But that's kind of a weird dynamic where you're like, well, I like belong and I don't belong, and I think I had to come to terms with that. And, there's such a like wide array of different cultural influences that have shaped my like creative perspective, some of which I have more claim to than others, if that makes any sense. For example, I did an artist residency in Morocco because I was really interested in Gnawa and Jalali music and like the way that music can put people into states of ecstatic trance.
Yeah.
And that was a transformative, powerful, incredible experience. And definitely shaped my musical perspective, like loving that music. I have no cultural claim whatsoever to, Berber and, tribal music of Northern Africa. But it's still, but like also because I love music so much and I really enjoy doing weird music research projects. I mean, there's a ton of subgenres from around the world that have like really impacted my musical sensibility, even though they likely are not immediately apparent if you listen to my music, but like I'm into that, So I don't know if that's really answering your question about the extent to which like Mexican culture has shaped my creative sensibility, but I think it probably has in all sorts of ways that I don't even know. But also that tracing all of the different influences feels like an impossible task.
Sure.
To me.
Look, look, most of these questions are prompts at best. Saying like, where I'm like, just like, go off in this direction and see what pops up. Because I do think it's interesting, and it might just be a product of the last like 5-10 years. But, I remember when people would get angry if you like, if someone said like, oh, I listen. Okay, I'll just say this. When I used to write music criticism in the early 2000s, I wrote something about Animal Collective where I was like, hey, they use a lot of like Native American imagery and kind of themes in their music. And I'm not saying they can't do that or they shouldn't do it, but I just think that we should all be aware of this stuff. And I got so much hatred online for just pointing that shit out. Mm-hmm. And again, I didn't say don't do it. I didn't say, but like, I'm just like, hey, be aware, maybe be a little, when you are like, not exploiting necessarily, but like, you can't help what you are influenced by. It just happens. It just gets into your brain and it kind of like pushes some neurons around and your hands move differently on the guitar or whatever, right? You can't control that stuff. But just like, it's all, my whole point was just be careful about commodifying something that other people like exploiting, basic Marxist shit, right? Don't pull out of the global South and exploit for your own gain, which I don't think they were doing. But anyway, it is interesting though that you are, sorry, go on.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I think that conversations around cultural appropriation are really important and at the same time, really, really difficult when it comes to pop music because the entire history of, pop music in the 20th century is popularization of largely musical styles originated by people of color and then profited off of by white men mostly. Yeah. So like it, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to have these conversations, but I think a lot of the time there are not easy answers. Fashion's a good example of that too. It's like, nothing is made in a bubble. Nothing is made in isolation. We all are influenced by the world around us in, all sorts of different ways. But absolutely it's problematic when people in positions of privilege are profiting off of labor done by marginalized people and not giving credit. Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, look, if anyone on the show knows this stuff, the best, it's going to be you. So I guess I can just, I tiptoe around this stuff with guests sometimes because
it's hard.
It's really difficult.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel you. I think talking about cultural appropriation in the arts is really tricky. And there are some examples where it's very clear and egregious. And then there are lots of examples where it's a little more murky. Yeah. Because, like I said, there's no idea that doesn't have a relation to other references on this earth. Yeah. And like we are spongy entities. Yeah. So I don't know. Like I think it's mostly just for artists to be humble and to be willing to have compassionate conversations and interrogate their privilege when they're in a position of privilege.
Right.
I don't know. I think that's kind of the best you can do.
Yeah.
'Cause it's like we can't erase the entire history of pop music.
Yes.
Like,
or you, and again, like I said, you can't stop something from influencing you. You can't stop it from getting in your brain. And like, if the pathway in your brain is already formed and it happens to like resonate with that pathway or whatever, I know this is not actually how your neurobiology works, but it's a metaphor, right? Mm-hmm. But like, what I am curious about more in the conversation is, you know, how do you as an artist react to it, and how does it like, because it does, if you are knowledgeable about the stuff and you are careful about it, it does still produce anxiety, right? There is still a particular anxiety that I think is irreducible in this, and I think that's an interesting energy, and I'm not even, you know, this is the first time I think I've really talked about it on here, but like, I don't know where that energy goes or what it does. And I don't know if you've thought about it, like in your own body, where does that anxiety go?
Well, are you talking about anxiety connected to cultural appropriation?
Not even appropriation necessarily. Like, I mean, I'm not saying like you are like putting on a like Native American headdress and like going to a party, right? I'm saying more like, you know, you said when you did that residency in Morocco because the music spoke to you in a certain way, or like even you said there's other music
kind of like cultural colonialism.
Yeah, or I don't even want to like make it that. I don't even think that in this case, in your case, or in other cases of what I'm talking about, that it's that either it's colonialism or appropriation. It's just like being human. You can't help but be influenced by something that speaks to you or that resonates with you. But when you go to make your own art, there's a certain line that crosses where it can become appropriation or colonialism. But before you get to that line, if you understand these kinds of concepts, you're aware of what's going on, it can create the dissonance between your own moral position and the fact that you can't help but be influenced by certain things. I think there's some dissonance there that can create anxiety. And I don't, maybe it doesn't happen in you. I know, you know.
Well, it's funny because I don't feel like I've experienced very much anxiety in that vein as a musician, though I have to some extent as a reporter. As a musician, listen, I think anybody who's making creative work needs to be thoughtful about what they're putting out into the world. And I don't feel like I've ever been in a position where there was something that I was about to release that I had serious ethical doubts about, whether it was harming a particular group or plagiarizing someone's work. I've never produced something where that was the case. I mean, if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, "What about that thing?" Like, please let me know. But I don't think so. But you know, I'm a white woman who does immigration reporting, and I'm not fluent in Spanish, so I've definitely thought about that and about the extent to which I'm helping or harming by being a spokesperson for communities. I mean, because like I guess it's a little different to be a reporter than be a spokesperson, but I was talking to a colleague last night, actually, who she's a young woman. She just graduated from college and is like kind of embarking on her reporting career. She was an intern with us at El Paso Matter, so I worked with her pretty closely there. And now she's at another publication. But she's from Mexico and she's in the U.S. on a visa, and she's felt really torn about reporting on immigration because she's worried about that impacting her immigration status. And it's like, I was talking to her about it. I was like, you know, I fully respect if you don't want to report on immigration because of that, but I also like think it's so important for people with her perspective and experience to be the ones reporting on immigration, because she deeply understands the lived reality of like dealing with this crazy bureaucracy in a way that, I mean, I have some perspective because of my family structure, because of living on the border, but there are other things that I just will never know because of my own, you know, experience. And the best I can do is in my reporting, try to be honest and do justice and help, you know, help hold power to account and shed light on things that aren't being talked about enough. But yeah, I've definitely grappled with like my position in the world, doing this work. And ultimately, I mean, I feel like I'm helping, but I also think it's really important to lift up people who don't arrive at, say, journalism or any number of other careers with the same set of privileges that I have.
Right.
And make sure to carve out space for those voices. So, because I mean, like this industry, like so many others, is very white male dominated. And it's changing, but it's moving slow.
Yeah. I think that's a really, I really like how you put that. Because I think what happens for a lot of people is that they get to a certain, like I can't control that I am white and male. I can't, that's just, again, an irreducible biological fact about, I mean, obviously whiteness is sorry, not to get too into theory, but obviously it is a construction, racial capitalism, but, I can't control the biology parts of it, but I can control whose voices, when I get into places of power, whose voices I help bring into the mix. Yeah. Right. I think that's I think that's important to say, because a lot of people do pull up the ladder after them. At least what I've seen in entertainment is people get to a certain place and then they close the windows, lock the doors, and pull up the ladder.
I mean, I think the question for everybody is to just like ask yourself, what power do I have, and how am I going to choose to use it in a way to promote, fairness and compassion and diversity and help make the world better. Yeah. Like, and if you're not thinking about your power or the ways that you use it, then maybe you're using it in some bad ways. Because like, I think it's important to ask those questions.
I mean, we're towards the end of the show, but if you don't mind, I'm kind of curious, okay, besides 9/11 kind of closing down the border for a little bit, obviously, it's got, I mean, I was, the border has been such a changing landscape, let's say, in a very reductive way since then, right? Obviously, during the Obama years, he was referred to as the deporter in chief. It got worse during the Trump years, or it's been the same. It's been awful, since 9/11, let's say. And I'm kind of curious about how that is like, both with your family and kind of your own perspective on things, how, as things have changed, this is what I'm trying to get at, being a kind of like what I'm calling an in-between person, how has that kind of like changing landscape there and living around there. And I know you went to grad school in Happy Valley and you were in New York, but like, I'm kind of curious about your relationship to the border and its shifting, the shifting status there and how it changes you. Does that make any sense at all? I know that was a little rambling.
Well, I think that since becoming a full-time reporter, reporting on immigration, that has really shifted my understanding, because I think prior to doing this work, I was the same as I imagine a lot of other people are when it comes to border policy, which is that, I read the news and I understood some of it, but it was always so overwhelming, right? Because it's so complex, and there's so much news about the politics of the border, and there's so much rhetoric around it. So, like when I lived in New York, I think I sought to try to let people know that there's more to the borderlands than just like the politics, because that's most of what a lot of people know. But once I started working in it and like interviewing people in ICE detention on a regular basis and talking to a lot of migrants and people who are like in the gears of the U.S. immigration system, my understanding of it has just expanded, profoundly. There's still a lot that I'm always learning, but it's tricky to have this conversation because as someone who reports on immigration, I'm not really at liberty to share my opinion about specific policies or what I think, governments or institutions should do. Mm-hmm. All I can say is that I've been able to witness how it works on the ground, and it's heartbreaking. So I don't know if that really, I think that, since being a reporter and reporting on immigration, I've just become so much more aware of the human experiences or the tragedies wrapped up in the migration kind of apparatus that exists, and just how, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of curious about just the emotional part. I guess the underlying thing I'm trying to think about is just again, this is why this is so rambling, because I don't understand. I don't have a clear picture in my mind of exactly what I'm aiming at, just a kind of vague area of you move around all these places. Where you end up settling itself is a place that has not El Paso, but on the border, which has a very shifting, which has a shifting status that mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not a journalist. I can say grinds people up because of bureaucratic choices, and not just grinds people up, but obviously it's an overused cliche to say Kafkaesque, but I think it's appropriate in this case to call it Kafkaesque. And I'm kind of curious about through this whole. Sorry, I'm in my head hating my word choices. This journey from childhood through this place and having being moving around and being in the shifting place. I'm kind of curious just about how either your creative life or maybe even more deeply your emotional life, how it affects that. This kind of again, I have this in my mind I have this metaphor of these tectonic movements, earthquakey things. It's all dumb metaphors. And that's why this is all so rambly, because it's all metaphors in my head. But does any of that make sense to you as a question or a prompt?
I don't think what I'm about to say is going to answer your question, but maybe this has something to do with being an in-betweener, borderlander person. Maybe it's just fundamental to who I am. But I kind of have the idea about my life that I'm not going to just be one thing. And I'm not going to, I plan to work until I die. And I want to always be doing work that I find invigorating and fascinating and challenging and things that push me to grow and be better and in turn to have some sort of a positive impact on the world around me. And right now, this feels like a good place for me to be doing that. I don't know if I'll be a reporter forever. Maybe. But I also might become a cobbler. I don't know. Life is long and life is short. It moves fast, and I'm just trying to keep it fresh. So
no, I think that's interesting. Again, so I think maybe what I'm trying to figure out is if you are emotionally comfortable with change, having.
Oh yeah.
Maybe that's
I think I'm too comfortable with change, and I've been trying to be a more stable person, but prior to COVID, really, the way I had lived, I talked before about taking risks and embracing the possibility of failure in service to doing cool shit that brings you joy. But I maybe veered a little too far on the chaos end of the spectrum, and now I've been trying to push it more toward the stable end of the spectrum. Because I mean, there's a part of me that just loves being on the road and meeting new people every day and having very shifting surroundings, because I love doing that. I mean, and I feel comfortable in volatility, I think. I'm a little chaotic.
That actually seems like a really nice place to end.
Okay. But I'm working on it.
Hey, you get no judgments from over here. All right.
I'm judging myself.
All right. Well, that I can't control. I mean, that's my life. So, is constantly, turning all the anger and stuff inward. So I get it. Renee, thank you. Thank you for bearing with the rambling questions as I tried to figure out the terrain.
Hey, I respect rambling questions.
It's just interesting. Like I've just been like, I especially talking to you, I thought there was like a lot of new stuff that I haven't really articulated on the show before. So that's kind of why some of the stuff was a little imperfect. A little imperfect. I think we could say that
we were perfect.
Yeah, I think we could say, like, if not perfect, asymptotically perfect. I mean, definitely like close. So, but thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and you challenged me to think about a lot of things that I haven't thought about in a long time with my childhood. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, this is the armchair psychology of podcasts. So.
And hey, thanks for listening to the album too.
It's great. I mean, it's great. I was not blowing smoke. It's a great album. I really love it.
Thanks. I'm glad.
And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh.